I'm Matt McClure, and this is Currents. Teetering on the brink, the Postal Service reaches out for a lifeline, but that could mean more money out of your pocket. Plus, it's Hispanic Heritage Month. We'll go into the deep with Bishop DiMarzio to talk about it.
I think the diocese has responded very well. Could we have responded better? Of course. There's never a perfect response to the integration of immigrants into the life of the church.
And from Mexico City to Midtown Manhattan, it's one man's journey of faith.
The film is really about immigration and what happens every day with the hope of people pursuing a dream by coming here to the States.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. Your snail mail could take just a bit longer to arrive. The U.S. Postal Service has announced plans to shut down 250 processing facilities across the country. The Postmaster General is also calling on Congress to cut the number of days mail is delivered.
If we're going to return to profitability, we've got to have legislation that allows us to be flexible in the way we manage this organization. Specifically, delivery flexibility. We need the legislation now to move from 6 to 5 days.
Donahoe says the immediate goal is to cut costs by $20 billion by the year 2015. He says that could also mean an increase in the price of stamps. There's no word on exactly what that increase might amount to, but last year, ahead of a proposed rise in postage, our Ingrid Rojas checked in with a local pastor to find out the potential impact.
A proposed stamp increase, which the Postal Service is talking about, would have a tremendous impact on us from different perspectives.
Monsignor Hardiman, pastor of San Sebastian Church in Woodside, Queens, one of the largest parishes in the Diocese of Brooklyn, is worried about the United States Postal Service's proposed stamp increase. With a mailing list of over 3,000 addresses, a 2-cent increase will make a big dent in his already stretched budget.
Our postage bills for the past 2 years have averaged about $6,000 a year. So a 2-cent increase on top of that is going to be a considerable increase for us as a parish.
But a price increase seems inevitable for the Postal Service, which has been struggling with a decline in revenue for the past 2 years. Email and the economic crisis are mostly to blame. According to Postal Service's figures, mail volume dropped by almost 26 billion pieces of mail in just 1 year.
We're the second largest employer in the United States, so we have 600,000 employees. We simply don't have enough mail to keep the folks busy. So we have to become leaner and think of better ways to do things.
In addition to the proposed price increase, the Postal Service also proposed cutting delivery from 6 to 5 days. If passed, both proposals would take effect in January 2011, hurting many nonprofits, including churches.
That means that cost of that additional postage is going to have to come from the collection. So I'm asking them to donate more, and part of their increased donation is going to pay for the increase in postage.
I suggest for churches, organizations that do mailings, they could always use what we call the forever stamp. If you purchase that stamp today at 44 cents, even after the price increase goes into effect on January 2nd, the postage is still good for first class.
However, Monsignor Hardiman doesn't think forever stamps solve his problem.
That would mean that we'd have to buy a lot of them right now, and that means that we'd have to put the money up front rather than be able to spread out over the different times for mailing. So I don't think that's an area that's going to be helpful to us.
Public reaction about the price increase is mixed.
I'm not really surprised. I think you guys are probably the post office is just going to probably keep increasing forever. I just got to get some forever stamps so I don't have to keep buying those 1 and 2 cent stamps.
Oh, I'm very disappointed. I mean, I think these increases are coming far too often. I think the service is deteriorating greatly because of all the layoffs and cutbacks. It's like the MTA. I think the service is going down, but we're being asked to pay more.
We're operating the way we used to operate in the 1970s, and it's 2000, 2011's right around the corner, so we have to put these changes in place to stay viable.
It probably is going to lead us to avoid using the Postal Service and move to email as a more effective means of communication.
A new year, but the same story. We'll have to just kind of wait and see on this one. Well, don't go anywhere. There is more Currents ahead. When we return, a pro-life leader explores his options after his bishop calls him home. We'll have the latest on that story, plus the rest of the day's headlines next. Welcome back to Currents. I'm Matt McClure. Coming up later, from Mexico to Midtown Manhattan, a new film documents one man's journey of a lifetime. First, though, let's have a look at today's headlines. Well, the National Director of Priests for Life says he would consider forming his own religious order if his bishop won't allow him to return to full-time pro-life work. Bishop Patrick Zurich suspended Father Frank Pavone from ministering outside his home diocese of Amarillo, Texas. The bishop raised concerns about the Priests for Life's finances and Pavone's obedience to the bishops. Pavone, who is protesting the order, says he will also consider transferring to another diocese. Meanwhile, the Traditionalist Society of St. Pius X may soon be coming back to the Catholic Church. The Vatican spokesman says the society would likely be given the status of a personal prelature, which would give the group a jurisdiction inside the church without geographical boundaries, if it agrees to certain core church teachings, that is. Now, the society's leader was excommunicated back in the 1980s after ordaining bishops without Vatican approval. A Texas death row inmate reportedly thanked God after being spared the death penalty, at least for now. Andrew Spencer has more on that story.
Dwayne Buck's only surviving victim celebrated his stay of execution Thursday night.
I have forgave him. Yes, sir, I forgave him in 1995.
Phyllis Taylor was one of 3 people Buck shot after an argument that year. Now she's pushing for the state to spare his life.
I feel that justice will prevail. I thank God for all the prayers. I thank God that He is a God of a second chance.
The U.S. Supreme Court says it will now review Buck's case. The convicted murderer had already eaten what was to be his last meal when the court issued the 11th hour stay of execution.
We are excited and rejoicing, and we know that he deserves life.
Buck was taken from his holding cell near the state's execution chamber and sent back to death row to wait on word of what will happen next. Defense attorneys want him to get a second sentencing hearing. They say the first one was tainted by racially charged testimony from a psychologist.
And that is Andrew Spencer reporting. Well, the Virginia State Board of Health has passed new regulations that could result in most of the state's abortion clinics being forced to close. The 15-member panel overwhelmingly approved the new measures by a vote of 12-1, with 2 members not in attendance. The rules require abortion clinics in Virginia to meet the same standards as hospital surgical centers. Among the requirements, expanding the width of hallways and the size of operating rooms, and also increasing the number of parking spaces. Well, meanwhile, France is cracking down on public prayer. The country's interior ministry has banned people from praying in the streets of Paris. It's become an issue outside some mosques as the growing number of Muslims in France has limited the seating inside those mosques. The government has made temporary prayer spaces available. Some Muslims, though, say the new law is an attempt to garner far-right support for French President Nicolas Sarkozy heading into this year's election. Catholic bishops in Germany, meantime, criticizing some lawmakers' plans to boycott a speech by Pope Benedict. The pontiff is scheduled to speak to Parliament during a trip to his home country next week. A group of about 100 members of Parliament, made up primarily of people from Germany's opposition parties, say they will boycott the speech for violating the separation of church and state. The Archbishop of Cologne called the protest small-minded. Well, from England, an observance that has in recent times been a requirement only during Lent will now be mandatory year-round. That is, abstaining from meat. The new rule went into effect today. Catholics in England and Wales are being asked to abstain from meat as an act of penance. It started today to mark the first anniversary of Pope Benedict's visit to the UK. Closer to home, clergy of all stripes came together yesterday for a new initiative to drum up support for the DREAM Act, which would grant young undocumented immigrants who meet certain criteria a path to citizenship. We sent our cameras to yesterday's gathering.
When we talk about immigration reform, we're really not just talking about undocumented immigrants, but we're talking about all of us. I can't think of a more fitting place to have this event than a church.
Since the DREAM Act was voted down the end of last year, there's been a lot going on, a lot of organizing of the young people, a lot of continuing to build support in the faith communities. The legislators have reintroduced the bill, so I think it's a great time to be announcing a national Sabbath for Dreamers. We want to continue to build momentum for the DREAM Act that actually would address every young person under a certain age to become legalized.
We are undocumented and we are no longer afraid. And this is the message we are sending to the entire country because we are Americans.
We are having Dreamers come and speak in services. There's 10 scheduled already in the city, but already, this morning my email and inbox is filled with people saying, okay, how do we get on board?
At the moment, because DREAM hasn't passed, literally, most of us that are in college, and when we graduate, we're not going to be able to do anything with our career.
12 million undocumented people are in our midst. Well, a good number of them will live in Corona or come to Corona for Mass. So I feel blessed that I'm with these people, and also as their pastor, I have to fight for them.
This is not one more issue among many that we line up faith leaders for. This is a fundamental act of self-definition for Jews and Christians and Muslims. What we're seeing is the foundation of a new spiritual revival.
Well, it looks like clergy may be the best at staying positive, at least according to a new survey, which shows that of all the jobs out there, clergy are the happiest. New research from the University of Chicago suggests that may have something to do with the fact that they have a lot of social interaction. Firefighters came in second, with physical therapists, authors, and special education teachers rounding out the top 5. And we told you earlier in the week about next year's Major League Baseball schedule, which includes the Cincinnati Reds opening the season at home on Good Friday. Well, now there's word that officials will, quote, work to make something work out. Rather, they'll try to meet to do that and make something work out to make the game work on Good Friday. The chairman of a parade held to commemorate opening day tells the website Cincinnati.com that parade officials will meet with Reds officials after the season ends to work out the details of that day's events. A spokesman for the Archdiocese of Cincinnati calls the situation a conflict of moods, as Good Friday is not a celebratory day. Well, stay with us. There is much more currents ahead. Coming up, Hispanic Catholics are a big part of the life of the church in Brooklyn and Queens. Bishop DiMarzio drops by to talk about it.
More than half of our Catholics are Spanish-speaking, and we really should give them the faith formation that we are giving everybody else through our media.
Welcome back. Well, they make up more than 35% of Catholics in the United States and more than half of all Catholics in the U.S. under the age of 25. And there is no doubt about it, they're a growing influence in the church and the country. We're talking about Hispanics, more than 2 out of 3 of whom here in the U.S. identify as Catholic. And there's no better time than just right now to talk about Hispanics and their influence in the culture and in the church as we begin our celebration of Hispanic Heritage Month. It begins right here in the middle of September, lasts through the middle of October. Well, joining me now to go into the deep to talk more about it is, of course, Bishop Nicholas DiMarzio. Bishop, thanks so much for being here.
Good to be here.
Really appreciate your time, of course, as always. As we just mentioned there, you know, people of Hispanic origin are the largest ethnic or race minority in the U.S. according to the census last year. Do those numbers pan out here in the Diocese of Brooklyn as well?
It would be actually the same. Half of the Catholics in New York and Brooklyn, Diocese of Brooklyn, would be Hispanic Catholics. We're looking at the number that's been used as about 60% of Hispanics identify themselves as Catholic. If we were to do that with the latest census figures, it would give us roughly about half of the Catholic population in Brooklyn and Queens would be Hispanic, and that's where we're at.
Well, and such large numbers, of course, that's been an increase that we've seen over the last several years and decades, that those
Sure.
numbers have just gone up and up. How has the diocese responded to that influx?
I think the diocese has responded very well. More than half of the parishes have a Spanish language liturgy each Sunday, which would mean there's a Spanish language priest there or somebody who's shared. The great majority, there's somebody in the parish who speaks Spanish. If it's not the pastor, it's an associate or a priest that would be shared between a couple of parishes. I think when we compare this, again, always comparative analysis tells you how well you're doing. Or you have to look to the history of the church in the United States. When the new immigrants came in, basically it was a time of growth with the church, and all the new immigrant groups, little by little, had their own parishes. They built their own churches for the most part, but that's not going to happen today. There is an economic growth. It's impossible that this could happen, but we see that parishes have been, in some places, populated by Hispanics, and they're what you would call a Spanish national parish for the most part. So things are different. The sociology is different today, and so is the economic situation. I believe we have responded. Could we have responded better? Of course. There's never a perfect response to the integration of immigrants into the life of the church. I think we're seeing now a vocation increase among the Hispanic young men and women, even in some of the religious orders. It's indicative of the need of a generational time. The first generation, the immigrant generation, usually doesn't produce too many vocations. The second, more, and the third, most. If this is to follow the pattern of all of the other immigrant groups that have come here previously, I think it's going to be fairly similar. So I think, to answer the question, I think we have responded well. And on our diocese, I'm really proud of the priests who are not of Hispanic origin, who have learned Spanish, who speak Spanish, who really carry out ministry in that way. We have a lot to be proud about.
Sure. And how is the diocese using its communication tools like tablet and here at NET as well to reach out to the Hispanic community?
Well, recently in the last year, we have the tablet having a monthly edition in Spanish. Also, the weekly edition always has my column at least translated into Spanish. We're on the net. We have programming, especially on Sunday afternoon. And at other times, we hope that if we can develop our Spanish programming, we might be able to get kind of a sub-band where we can have constant Spanish programs, but that's a technical thing that might be able to be done. So I've always asked for that because this, again, more than half of our Catholics are Spanish speaking, and we really should give them the faith formation that we are giving everybody else through our media. So I look forward to doing better, and I think we've begun to be more sensitive.
All right, improving all the time.
All right.
Bishop DiMarzio, thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate your time, sir. And stay with us. There's more currents ahead. When we return, as Hispanic Heritage Month gets underway, we'll have the story of one man's long journey carrying the torch of his faith.
The essential idea of the torch is that it unites, it gives people hope.
Well, finally tonight, we conclude this week and our kickoff to Hispanic Heritage Month with a look at an annual tradition for Mexican Catholics. It's a torch run, but it has nothing to do with the Olympics. It happens every year, starting at the Basilica of Guadalupe in Mexico and ends at St. Patrick's Cathedral in Midtown Manhattan. We had a chance to check out a film that documents the run back in the spring.
Tonight we're premiering a documentary. It's called Contigo al Norte Guadalupe, which is a documentary about the torch run that is done from Mexico City to New York.
Every year there is a race, a march of Mexicans that come from Mexico City to New York City carrying a torch and the images of the Virgen of Guadalupe.
Our Lady of Guadalupe is essential to our Christianity, to our beliefs. She is in a way, the mother of our independence. She means more to Mexico than just being the mother of God. You can say that Our Lady of Guadalupe can be the flag of Mexico as a nation because it's so important. She's a companion. She is someone who is with us, a light that guides us. The essential idea of the torch is that it unites, it gives people hope. In Mexico, the people that run the torch are usually the family members of the people that are here. In Mexico, a mother touches the torch. Some weeks later, the son or the daughter or nephew touches that same torch here in the United States, and he carries the torch, and so on, so on. So it's really an event that brings hope to people.
Todo muy buena carrera. Es como uno tiene que esforzarse.
The story runs around a Mexican young man who went back to Mexico. He was already living in the United States, so he went back to Mexico. He didn't have papers to come back again inside the States. He knew that making the race was going to leave him out of his new place, his new home.
Me decidí más que nada por la fe que tenía yo de ir a hacer la antorcha y las ganas de ir a hacer la antorcha a México. Una protesta porque todos nosotros los inmigrantes venimos aquí a trabajar, a luchar. Y no venimos a hacer desastres, ni a robar nada. Y es un gran riesgo que tomamos y yo sabía el gran riesgo que iba a ser para mí, para volver a cruzar, ¿no? Para mí era muy importante no perder mi fe. Siempre era mi pensamiento a mi madrecita de Guadalupe. Siempre era ella, no perder mi fe. Porque muchos me decían, mira, te dejaron, la carrera ya llegó. Ya ellos están allá felices y tú estás todavía aquí cruzando. Pero nunca perdí mi fe. Sigo con mi fe en alto con ella.
The race is a metaphor of what actually happens with migration. So that's what the film is really about, the migration and what happens every day with the hope of people pursuing a dream by coming here to the States to find a job and a better place to live.
Powerful story there, and be sure to tune in to Currents in the weeks ahead for more on Hispanic Heritage Month. This weekend, though, all of Brooklyn is going to be green. But no, it's not St. Patrick's Day. You are looking at your calendar properly. It is the Great Irish Fair. Be sure to head over to MCU Park in Coney Island this weekend if you have a chance. We'll have coverage of the fair and much more coming up on Monday's Currents. Until then, though, be sure and visit us online over at currentsny.net. We're also on Facebook and on Twitter. We're just all over the World Wide Web, so catch up with us wherever you can. For all of us here at Currents, I'm Matt McClure. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great weekend.